Dear younger me, I'm writing to you at a time you had a paradigm that didn't belong. You thought we needed to move on without acknowledging our history. So let me briefly explain why you were wrong.
Hi there, I'm Jim Thunder, and I just wanted to explain a little bit more about this spoken word poem that I made. It's a spoken word poem to my younger self. And the first thing I want to explain is decolonization. In order to talk about what decolonization means, we need to first talk about what is colonization. So I found myself speaking publicly about colonization, and somebody came up to me and asked me, why are you talking about hating white people? And it just hit me like, how could you possibly think I was even going there? That was sort of my first point of realizing that a lot of people don't really know what the word colonialism actually means. So let's define it. In my poem, I talk about colonialism means absorbing a nation by erasing its identity. It's describing when a country settles people in another country for the purpose of exploiting the people or the resources. So when we had colonies that were set up during the Age of Discovery, that was the purpose. The purpose was exploitation. So when we're talking about colonialism, this is what we're talking about specifically. We're not talking about just one race having it out against another race. We're talking about exploitation. There's nothing good about that. So what are we talking about when we talk about decolonization? We're talking about the state that we find ourselves in now, where we're no longer trying to exploit each other. Decolonization is a step towards reconciliation, where we're trying to do life together. We're looking at partnerships, not exploitation. In my spoken word poem, I say decolonize your life, your walk, your church, the talk you use at work. It's talking about looking at the effects of colonialism in our life, in our work, and in our mind, and trying to find a way to remove the effects of colonialism. And again, in the context, I'm writing to my younger self. So how is it that my younger self had a mind that was affected by colonialism? There's a really good article that I'm going to post in the description. It's called Contact Theory in a Small Town Settler Colonial Context. This article was written by Jeffrey S. Dennis in 2015. In this article, he talks about this new concept, laissez-faire racism. In the article, the premise, the basic idea is that if you increase contact between two people groups, the idea is that contact, by its very nature, will resolve all the effects of racism. But the article makes the case that this is not what's happening. And he gives some reasons for this. First of all, he defines racism and laissez-faire racism as two different things. Racism, he would argue, is it's this old-fashioned racism. It's overt hostility to somebody of another race. But there's a new type of racism that's sort of sneaking in, and he calls that laissez-faire racism. And this term came up after the movement led by Martin Luther King, where, we see less of the overt hostility and more of this laissez-faire racism, this quiet racism that you hold internally. You don't speak it overtly, but it still affects your decisions and how you go about life, and it has a strong effect on our society. He makes the argument that there are three social processes that keep this laissez-faire racism going. These processes that he's talking about is, first of all, subtyping, ideology-based homophily, and political avoidance norms. So what are these three things? Well, first of all, subtyping. Subtyping is the idea of, if you have a stereotypical image of a certain people group, of First Nations, for example. Subtyping is the idea of looking at somebody who's successful, like a successful First Nations person who's working hard and doing great. Subtyping is looking at that person and seeing them as the exception to the rule, rather than an example of why this stereotype shouldn't exist in the first place. That's subtyping. Ideology-based homophily. Well, first of all, what's homophily? Homophily is when, as human beings, we want to be around and make friendships with people who are like us. For example, age-based homophily. You want to make friends with people who are the same age as you, have the same interests, that kind of a thing. So homophily is a part of our human condition. Ideology-based homophily is when you make friends with people who think like you and have the same paradigm or worldview as you do. And so this plays itself into the small town settler colonial context of people having the same ideas and perspectives and stereotypes of First Nations people sticking in their groups, and those who understand our history a little bit better stay in their groups. And this perpetuates laissez-faire racism. The third one that we're talking about is political avoidance norms. So this is the idea of categorizing the First Nations people who speak up about their history, who speak about their rights, and who speak about what needs to change in order for us to reach a state of reconciliation. If we label these people as, the inconvenient people, the inconvenient First Nations people, and then you have the good First Nations people who don't talk about those types of things. They put their head down, they do their work, and they live their lives. Because in doing that, by putting their head down, then it's playing into group theory, the idea that you keep the privileged people privileged and everything remains the status quo. So in this article, these three processes continue to perpetuate laissez-faire racism. So this is my background. This is where I'm coming from. These three processes kept this improper paradigm in my own life, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm writing to you at a time you had a paradigm that didn't belong. This is the context that I'm coming from. And this is what this spoken word poem is meant to address. To break these cycles, to stop the subtyping, to stop this ideology-based homophily, and to stop these political avoidance norms. Because in order for us to move forward and talk about reconciliation in this country, we need to stop doing these things. We need to talk about how do we fix the relationship? How do we redefine the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, and how do we move forward? And that's exactly what this spoken word poem is meant to talk about, and this is how it's meant to push us forward. I end this section talking about how decolonized eyes see the world not as they are, but how they should be. And that's what this is all about. What does reconciliation look like? What does it mean? And how do we know when we've got there? So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be talking about each stanza of the poem and unpacking it a little bit better. So if you'd like to know more about the poem, just continue to follow my page, go to Reconciliation Thunder, and follow the videos as I post them. Thanks very much for watching.